Okay, this next section is the interactive skin bind section. I actually should be playing around with this a lot more, because when I originally wrote the interactive skin bind section, I didn't have a version of Maya that had interactive skin bind. Now that I do, I really need to go through it and learn how to do it myself a lot better. So I'm just going to give you a real brief overview of the interactive skin bind, more or less just a description, because I think I'd probably embarrass myself too much if I actually tried to do it during the video. And what I'll do is I'll probably make another video to do this section again once I have some practice with it. But I'll go over it real quick just so that those of you who do know how to use interactive skin bind will be able to jump right in. Okay, so interactive skin bind. I think the very first, it's for 2011 Maya and newer, since I believe it was 2011 when interactive skin bind was first introduced. So anyway, so I tried to put everything in steps with this one, so that you just kind of follow the steps, you know, and this doesn't, when you click on these two, it doesn't actually do anything. They're just kind of more for label, you know, than actual button that does anything. So this just tells you it's for Maya 2011 and newer, and this is for fitted mesh only. And so a lot of hair designers find interactive skin bind a lot easier to rig with, simply because with hair you have overlapping vertices a lot, and to try to weight paint hair is basically next to impossible. So the only way you can really do it is interactive skin bind, or one of the few ways you can do it. Okay, so interactive skin bind, you start off with step one, and you click step one, and that takes you to what it does is it changes certain settings on the skeleton to get it ready for interactive skin bind. Let me go to channel box. Okay. Let's see. It's mainly the, like I said, this is for fitted mesh, and fitted mesh you normally rig to just the collision bones. You can rig a little bit here and there to the M bones with fitted mesh, and sometimes there's an advantage to doing that under certain circumstances, but mostly when you say fitted mesh, you're rigging to just the collision bones. Although the M bones have to be in the skin cluster, but like I said, I have another video that shows how to do that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. So okay, so let's go back to reset default skeleton to 2011 and newer. Okay, and then let's click on the a collision bone. Okay, so here's the head collision bone. Okay, you notice how over here the scales are 0.11, 0.09, and 0.12. With the collision bone set to these scales, the capsule for interactive skin bind gets all messed up. It gets all distorted and all weird, because the capsule size is directly affected by the scale size of the bone, and 99.99% of the time in the 3D modeling world, your bones, when they're set at the default settings, you know, in the T-pose, the scales are all 1, 1, and 1. And so, because Second Life collision bones often don't have a scale of 1, 1, and 1, they have these weird scales here, it messes up the capsule. So when we go to interactive skeleton, and let me click on the head again, you'll see the scales are all set at 1, 1, and 1. And so that allows the capsules to be the correct size without these weird distortions. Otherwise, they become impossible to work with. Okay. And I don't know if it does it with the rotations or not. I can't remember if it puts the rotations at 0 or not. But anyway, it has to do with the capsules. So anyway, so we clicked on step 1. So step 2 is, now this is starting off with something that is not rigged. So say we are doing hair, you know, say you are rigging hair, you know, and you're going to do fitted mesh hair so that the hair gets bigger and smaller as people make their heads bigger or smaller, and that the hair is, if you have hair, long hair that's flowing over the breasts, you want the hair to be able to get bigger and to compensate and change as somebody has bigger or smaller breasts, you know. If you have hair cascading over the chest, over the breast. Okay, so that's what this is, just selecting collision bones. Select collision bones, the same exact thing as in MayaStar collision bone select. Same exact thing. Now, if you were doing hair, you don't have to rig to all the collision bones. So this is kind of an optional setting, an optional step. So if you were rigging hair and it was short hair, all you'd want to rig to would be to the head. If it was short hair. If it was sort of a bob cut that came down to around the neck or just barely the top of the shoulders, you would want to select the head and neck. And so what you do is you just click on the head, open up the outliner, expand the skeleton, and you can expand the skeleton all at once by holding down the Shift key and clicking on the plus sign. If you just click on the plus sign, it just opens up one at a time. Which you can do. It's up to you. Depends on whatever you find the fastest and easiest. Okay, so start off by clicking on the head, hold down the Control key, and select the neck. I mean, I could have held the Shift key down, but the Shift key selects everything in between the two. So if you were doing that, and say you had longer hair that actually fell onto the top part of the chest, you could select the chest too, and you could rig your hair to all three. And if you were really doing super long hair that cascaded over the breasts, you'd want to select the left and right pec bones. And you might not even want to do the chest at that point. So you would select, so these are, if you're doing hair, you're just doing rigging to the collision bones that you're going to use. The classic rigging, you have to rig to all of the M bones, which really kind of sucks. I'm after Veer and Oz to see if we can't change that, so that we don't have to rig. So classic rigging to the M bones, you have to rig to all of the M bones. You don't have to have weight on them, they just have to be in the skin cluster. Let's see. And that's true for Blender as well, although I know MayaStar takes care of a lot of that stuff behind the scenes, so Blender users don't have to worry about that stuff as much, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. But MayaStar is awesome in that. They have a lot of stuff automated to try to make it as easy as possible for the user. And they're like 2 years ahead of me. and Matrice has... They have like master's degree in programming. I'm like an advanced high schooler when it comes to creating mouse scripts and what have you, programming. I fully admit it. And so yeah, Matrice is awesome. Matrice blows me away with his skills. Okay, so that's collision bone select, or select all collision bones. And then you click interactive skin bind, and you bind the skin, and there's a volume type capsule. Capsule cylinder will work. It's just that capsule is probably more. You don't want joint hierarchy. You want selected joints. Bind method, you can use any bind method bind method distance. That's what you want to use, not hierarchy. Closest include method, closest volume. Bind minimum weight. I would just use adult default at first, see what it is. Then you got the skinny weights of classic linear, blended weights. I'd probably stick with classic linear. And I would turn off maintain max influences. Max influence for Second Life is 4 bones. That's the absolute maximum influence that a vertice can have. That's what max influence means. The maximum number of bones that any one vertice can be influenced by. And so 4 is the maximum. I usually have mine set at 3. I find 4 is really not necessary. I've never really found a reason for having to have 4. Maybe in the face, if you're doing facial, if you're creating mesh heads and you're rigging to the new face bones, 4 would probably be pretty good. You know, you might need 4 to get the best expressions. You know, but for clothes, I've never found anything that you need more than 3. Because if you have 4, it just makes things more complicated. Because now you have 4 bones to have to adjust the weights to instead of 3. 2 usually isn't quite enough. You know, 3 seems to be the sweet spot. And I would turn off Maintain Max Influence. Okay. And I know there is something tricky in here that other people have shown me. I'd probably do classic linear. Dual quaternion, weighted blend. You could try those. And yeah, so you can try those. So if classic linear doesn't work for you, use another. Turn off Maintain Max Influences, definitely. Okay, so, you know, so that's what that does, you know, interactive skin bind. You know, so you'd have your mesh clothing selected, or you select the collision bones that you're going to use, then you would hold down the shift key and select your mesh clothing, or come in the outliner and select your mesh clothing by holding down the control key and selecting the mesh, and then you would then you would click, you know, the interactive skin bind, and you click apply or bind skin, and then you would adjust the weights, you know, changing the size of the capsules, and you would have like if you were adjusting say you were going to do the breasts, you know, what you would do is you'd come in here and you'd come to torso after you smooth bind, and you'd put oh, that's the shoulders, I'm sorry, the breasts as big as they can go. Let's put the shoulders back at default, and then you would adjust the capsule for the left or right pec, and you would see that the vertices would update as you're doing that. That's how you adjust the weights. Let's see, so you do that, and you do that, and you might go to the head and try changing the head size and seeing how the hair, and you would select the, you know, the interactive skin bind tool, and you adjust the capsules for the head. You know, you'd select the head, and the outliner is, I find what I've been told is when you're adjusting the capsules, sometimes it's much easier to select the bone you're doing by selecting it in the outliner. But that's, you know, do it however you find most comfortable. Let's see. Oh, and then the same thing for the neck. If you had rigged to the neck, you would come in here and you'd find the neck thickness. Where is the neck? Where is the neck? Maybe it's the torso. Right, head size stretch. I think the neck would be in the head, wouldn't you? It's close enough, but it's not. So you come here to torso, and there's the neck thickness. And you would do that. Put it on maximum, and you'd see how your hair was affected by the neck thickness. Probably a lot of times people wouldn't even worry about the neck if they're doing hair. But you'd have to experiment. Let's see. It all depends on the hairstyle. You know. Let's see. Okay, so that would be okay. So after you do step number 3 and you adjust the capsules, which is adjusting the weights, and you're pretty happy, you know, you got a fairly good response. That might be enough. You might not need to make any more adjustments. then what you do is with your mesh, in this example, mesh hair selected, you would then detach skin with history. Of course, there's nothing selected, so if we were to detach skin with history, okay, we detached it from the skeleton. See, the arms are the yeah. See, the arms stayed where they were. Okay, and I just Controlled Z and got us back to normal. That is let's go back to the T pose. Okay, and let's put her back to the mesh default. What that does is it's the same as coming up here to skin, detach skin, and selecting the options, and by default, you know, reset settings. By default, delete history when you detach the skin. That's the default setting for Maya. And so what I did is, instead of having you have to come in here and change this to keep history all the time, I just made a Mel script that changes the option and lets you detach the skin, and then I think it resets the option back to the default afterwards. So it does it all for you automatically. Because most people, when you detach skin, they do want to delete the history. Because what happens when you detach? See how these are grayed out? When you detach something with history, it is actually detached from the skeleton. You know, it's detached from the skeleton. And you notice this isn't grayed out anymore, as if it was rigged. But it keeps the skin cluster. See, skin cluster 22. You see? And if you were to come in here, let me open up this and clear history. And if I were to come in here and go to earlier versions of MayaStar skin cluster name, or bone names, here's all the bones that are in that skin cluster. It's the skin cluster that holds the information of the weighting of the vertices. So that's why it has all the bone names in it. It still has all the information as if it was rigged, but it's no longer attached to that skeleton. If I were to say, I'm going to Control Z this back to where it's rigged, and watch this, it will, if I can come back to here. Okay, see, I Controlled Z back, and now it's back to being rigged. This is grayed out, you know. You can see it's rigged. And then if I come here and go to T-pose, okay, if I were to just have this selected and come up here and go detach skin with the default, that deletes the history, and go detach. Okay, you notice it's no longer rigged over here, but you'll notice there's no longer a skin cluster here under inputs. And if I were to clear the history and come here for earlier versions of Maya and click skin cluster bone names, it tells you there's an error. No object matches the name. There's no names in it because there's no skin cluster. This is an unrigged now bit of mesh that has no weighting information in it. Okay, so that's what that does, and it's important. And I'm going to Control Z, so now it's back to rig. So if I were to skin cluster bone name, there's the bones names. Clear history. Come here. Detach skin with history. Come here. Skin cluster bone names. There we go. So if you ever have a DAE file that won't upload, what you want to do is you want to select the mesh in Maya that you just tried that you just exported the DAE with, and you want to check to make sure that all the bones are there in the skin cluster. Fetid mesh, you can pick and choose which collision bones you want to use, or what the lab often refers to as collision volumes. collision volumes and collision bones are the same thing. So for fitted mesh, a fitted mesh has to have all of the M bones. These aren't even all of the M bones. Like this mesh, if you exported it out, would not upload to Second Life because it's missing the other M bones, all the other M bones in the skeleton. So this mesh, even if you exported it out, would not be able to be uploaded to Second Life. You would have to open up the outliner, and you would have to manually select all of the other bones. You know, although a quicker way would be to come here to normal bone select. Okay, so now it has all the M bones, even though it also has these bones selected. And then you would come here to MayaStar, and you would go add bones to skin cluster, and you would have, these are the settings that I suggest people use. Lock skin weights, have this default weight set at 0, and then you just click add. Now I hope that worked. Sometimes it let me see. Keep my fingers crossed. It's been so long since I've been. Yep, there they all are. There's the toes and the ankles. So it did. It did it correctly. Even though it came up with a little bit of an error that popped up, an error message. You know, error drop-off flag can be used. Oh, okay. This is telling me that drop-off flag can be used in edit mode only when adding influences. But it still added them. You know, so now this mesh you could export it out as a DAE and it would upload to Second Life. Fitted mesh, like I said, you have the bones rigged to just the collision bones that you want. Then you have to add the normal bones, the M bones, to the skin cluster before you can export it out as a DAE file. But you don't have to have all the collision bones in it. So it's one of those things where you have to have all the M bones, but you don't have to have all the collision bones. And you could have just M bones and no collision bones. So for interactive skin bind. But interactive skin bind is for fitted mesh only. I guess you could use it with regular mesh too. You know, but I guess you could. But this was basically set up for interactive fitted mesh. Okay, so you know what detached skin with history does? Reset default skeleton to 2011 or newer, which is the default skeleton. If you remember that I told you that that the chest bone, or where is it, the head bone? You know, interactive skeleton head bone is 1, 1, and 1 scale, and then when we reset it, the head bone should now be back to these weird scales, which are the default. And you have to have this back to these scales before you export out your DAE file. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll get an error when you upload your DAE file. So the skeleton has to be set back to the default before you export out your DAE file. Otherwise, it'll be all messed up. So that's why we detach with history. You detach with history because we need to reset the bones back to their original scales. If you didn't detach with history and reset this back to normal with your hair bone, these that were at 1, 1, and 1 would shrink down to 0.11, 0.09, 0.12, and your hair would shrink down, you know, because the scales have changed. That's why we detach the mesh from the skeleton. It still has the weighting information, but it's not attached to the skeleton. So as you change the scales of the skeleton back to normal with step 5, you know, back to normal with step 5, it doesn't affect your mesh because it's not attached to the skeleton. Okay. And then again, you can select all the collision bones, or you can select just the bones that you used. If you selected just the bones that you used, I would highly recommend that you just select the bones in the outliner that you used and not use step 6, unless you had used select all collision bones. Because we're going to do another, we're going to smooth bind the hair back to the skeleton, you know. But we're not going to do an interactive smooth bind or interactive bind skin. We're going to do just a regular smooth bind. So you select your mesh. So you select just the collision bones that you originally rigged to, hold down the shift key, select your mesh, or select your mesh first and then hold down the control key and select just those bones that you did use, unless you use step 2 and you just have it rigged to all the collision bones just to start with. And then you go on to step 7, which is smooth bind skin. Selected joints, I do closest distance. Let's see, classic linear. Oh, this is, okay, this is when, okay. This is where a lot of people were having trouble. And I wish I could remember where it was, is when they would rebind the hair to the skeleton with smooth bind options. It was this. I can't remember if it's better to have interactive, post, or none. It's like only one of these works. And since interactive is the default, I have a feeling that interactive makes the hair go crazy. Or whatever you rigged with interactive skin bind crazy when you go to redo it. So if you do it, don't panic. You know, if you click apply and the hair or the clothes goes crazy, just Control Z it to where it's not rigged anymore but still has the skin cluster, and try one of these other 2 options. I know one of them works. I just can't remember which one. Which one? But I know this is where it was messing up. This is where that interactive skin bind was really going crazy. Was one of these 3. Okay, distribution. I would leave it at distance, the default. You could try the other one. Allow multiple bind poses, I don't like. So I would leave that off. Maximum influences, you got to make sure that this is the same number of maximum influences that you had on the interactive skin bind, or interactive skin, interactive skin bind. Just make sure it's the same number of influences. I leave maximum influences off, and drop off rate. This can vary highly. I usually find 4.4 works, seems okay, but you can try different. That all depends on what you're reading. This is key. You do not, repeat, you do not want remove unused influences turned on. Because remember how I said you have to have all the bones in the skin cluster? For the M bones, for the normal bones? If you have that turned on, it would lose certain bones. Now, if you're just rigging to collision bones, that would be fine. You could turn that on. If you're just rigging to the collision bones, you can leave that on. Colorized skeleton, that can be turned on or off, it doesn't matter. So this is really important, selected joints. This is going, you could try the different, I usually use classic linear, but you can try a different one of these. This is going to be the key one if you start seeing things really go crazy. That's a key one. So that covers smooth bind skin. Okay. Now, step 8, normal bone select. So you have your mesh hair or your mesh clothing selected. And so you say you have your mesh clothing selected. And then you've already done the smooth bind. And now you're going to do normal bone select. Because remember, you have to have all of the normal bones in the skin cluster. So you do normal bone select, and then you click step 9, add bones to skin cluster. Make sure this is lock weight is turned off. And it would probably give me an error again unless this is set to 0. Whoops. I guess that's the minimum. I'm not sure if this matters or not. I usually leave it off. I'm so used to my older version of Maya. I'm so used to my older version of Maya that doesn't have some of these options. But it does have lock weights, and I had this always set to 0. And then so you would click apply, and it would add those bones to the skin cluster. Okay, because now that you've added those normal bones, or M bones to the skin cluster, whether it's, it's ready to be exported out. Okay, and now you're ready to export out. And let's see. Okay, so this has been a very long video because this was a lot more in depth than the other one. So I'm going to stop it here, and we'll go on to the next video.